Hello, all. We are here talking about U.S. arms sale to Taiwan and how that affects U.S.-China relations. Given recent news about Taiwan and its sovereignty, it is an important topic to cover. Here we have Caitlin Such, Gabriel Mercado, Diego Fernandez, and Thomas Ames. We'll be going over different areas of the U.S. arms sales to Taiwan and aid, and I hope you all enjoy it. So, I wanted to give some additional context to you guys regarding what sources we read for this. My segment is regarding what role Taiwan has and what agency they have regarding military arms sales. Before studying, I thought that both sides wanted to make sure that the other side did not know what the military capabilities were, and they would try to be hush hush about the arms sales. However, both nations spoke openly about their military capabilities. President Lai announced that they were going to be upgrading their Taiwanese missile defense system, and Chinese students and professors posted pictures of defense tech they were working on. I was expecting this level of technology to be classified as much as the Manhattan Project, but apparently both sides want to know what the other one is doing, so to speak. One difficult thing is as you can probably tell or intuit, they aren't exactly going to go into the details of what they have. That is more of a classified matter, so you can only get maybe a surface level of what their capabilities are, but not truly in depth. And that is, so the other one cannot exploit it as much. And now we turn it over to Caitlin for her lit review.
So, for my section of my lit review, I focused on the question, why does the US support Taiwan militarily, and how do history and Taiwan's priorities shape that support? So, I looked at the Taiwan Relations Act of 1979, Reagan's Six Assurances, the F-16 sales, and Taiwan's grand strategy and priorities. In his paper, Richard Hughes explains that the U.S. uses strategic ambiguity not just as a concept, but as a deliberate policy tool. It allows the U.S. to provide military support to Taiwan while signaling to China that the U.S. might intervene if necessary, balancing deterrence without provoking open conflict. One challenge I came across was weaving together decades of arguments, of agreements, arms, sales, and evolving policies into a narrative for these purposes. Overall, the sources show how US policy and Taiwan's goals work together to keep Taiwan secure and the region stable. Now I'll be turning it over to Diego.
Good afternoon, everybody. So for my section, I'm reviewing like the Trump admin's arms sales and aid. And I reviewed a bunch of different sources. I looked at the 2018 Thrall and Dormy analysis of U.S. arms sales and foreign policy, as well as the 2018 Defense and Security chapter by Glasser, Bush, and Green, as well as a bunch of government reports, congressional reports, and things of that manner. And the biggest takeaways, which I'll be speaking about more later, are that arms sales have been a critical aspect of the relationship between the two nations. And they continued to be normalized under Trump and even increase. In his first term, arms sales were extensive, um, and they culminated in 2020. And further, there has been some changes very, very recently in the last 3 or 4 or 5 days, about the policies of arms sales in his second term. We'll be speaking about that more. And the biggest challenge is the lack of transparency in terms of like the real underlying motives behind arms sales. You have to read between the lines and you have to analyze other events that are happening in the world, not just the arms sales themselves. And so piecing all of that together proved to be the largest challenge in this. After this, Gabe is going to be going into his brief review about the implications of comparative analysis.
Yeah, exactly as Diego said. I'll be focusing more on synthesizing what all three of my group members will be talking about and just focusing more on policy implications of these arms sales and the history and all these moves. The literature that I examined with scholars such as Michael Swain and Richard Bush argue that the U.S. arms sales to Taiwan operate as dual signals, both as reassurance to Taipei as well as deterrence towards Beijing. It debates whether Trump's larger, more public packages strengthened deterrence or increased escalation risks by undermining traditional strategic ambiguity. A challenge in the research that I conducted is that many official arms sales motivations are not fully transparent, which I think has been sort of hinted at, and making it sort of difficult to distinguish between generating strategic intent from domestic political signaling. I'll give it off to Caitlin to go deeper into the history and policy background.
Thank you, Gabe. So I will be starting our first segment on the historical and policy background. So the US-Taiwan relationship is shaped by history, trade, and security. In 1979, the US officially recognized China, ending formal diplomatic ties with Taiwan. But at the same time, Congress passed the Taiwan Relations Act, which allowed the US to maintain cultural, commercial, and other unofficial relations with Taiwan to provide defensive arms. This approach, called strategic ambiguity, lets the US support Taiwan while keeping China uncertain about how far it would respond to potential aggression. So, when talking about this, it's very important to acknowledge Taiwan's perspective. Taiwan functions as a democratic country separate from the PRC. Many Taiwanese people do not support the unification with China and prefer to maintain the current status quo. The loss of freedoms in Hong Kong has increased distrust of Beijing, as many Taiwanese see it as a warning of what could happen if China exerted more control. Despite these security concerns, Taiwan maintains strong trade with China, showing a careful balance between economic needs and political caution. It's also important to acknowledge key agreements and policies. To manage tensions, the US and China reached the August 17, 1982 communique outlining gradual reduction in arms sales. Around the same time, the US issued the six assurances to Taiwan. These assurances guaranteed that the US will not set a date to end arms sales, will not consult China before making arms sales decisions, and will not pressure Taiwan on sovereignty. In 1992, President George H.W. Bush approved the sale of 150 F-16 fighter jets to Taiwan, and this showed that the US was very serious about defending Taiwan while avoiding direct confrontation with China. Today, the US continues this approach, recently proposing $330 million in spare parts and repairs for Taiwan's fighter jets. All of these agreements tie directly into the US's strategic rationale. By helping Taiwan defend itself, the US deters Chinese aggression, maintains regional stability, and protects extremely vital trade routes. Taiwan's economy, especially because of its production of over 60% of the world's advanced semiconductors, makes it a very critical economic partner. And so this is why the US has increased support to ensure that Taiwan can protect its democracy while keeping East Asia's trade and security intact. On the Taiwan side of strategies and priorities, the President of the Republic of China, his grand strategy focuses on 4 pillars: societal resilience, active diplomacy, global economic stability, and building a symmetric defense. Taiwan also prioritizes things like food security, health system capacity building, governance, climate change, similarly as other countries do. And these domestic and international priorities are strengthened by the US military and diplomatic support, helping Taiwan maintain independence without provoking China unnecessarily. From Taiwan's perspective, the US is a security ally and major economic power. Taiwan is the US's ninth largest trading partner, and so the country values America's political backing. While Taiwan cannot rely on formal recognition, it navigates the US alliance carefully, balancing independence with avoiding direct confrontation. So the US support allows Taiwan to build its defense and maintain stability in the region. So in short, the US support for Taiwan is rooted in history, like I mentioned, strategic ambiguity, specifically with China, and regional security priorities. And Taiwan balances economic ties with China and relies on the US military and diplomatic backing to protect its democracy. So from here, I'll pass it to Diego, who will dive into the specifics of US military aid and arms sales under the Trump administration.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. Thank you, Caitlin. I'm going to be speaking about the arms sales under President Trump, his first term, kind of looking at how it's been developing in his second term now in 2025. And this doesn't take into account Taiwan's agency, which is important and will be spoken about later. I think that from what I'm going to say, there's two things you should take away. First, that arms sales support U.S. policy goals, and under Trump, we can speculate that these have an economic basis, right? Not only the funds that come to the U.S. from the sales, but also the sales can serve as a pawn in his economic negotiations with China. The other side is that they maintain a balance of power in the region. Like I spoke about, this is kind of shown in the literature. 2018, through Ron Dormney analyzed the arms sales in U.S. foreign policy, and 2018 Defense Security chapter by Glasser, Bush, and Green illustrated how arms sales are a critical aspect of the relationship between Taiwan and the U.S. and have continued to become normalized under the President Trump. And so this was really the case in his first term. Arms sales were extensive. 2020, over $5 billion were sold to Taiwan. It's one of the 5 countries the U.S. sold the most arms to. This is a little bit different in his first year, the second term, 2025. And then remember that arms sales are transactional, right? They're not a donation. They serve a symbolic, but also an economic purpose. There are other avenues, such as the Presidential Drawdown Authority, where President can send defense assets to other entities. 2024, President Biden used the system to send hundreds of millions of dollars of aid to Taiwan, including missile defense systems, rifles, all from existing DoD stock. On the transactional side, though, the U.S. government controls the exports of U.S.-made weapon systems, save for the most part small and light arms, which are available through like direct commercial sales to foreign governments. So it's light machine guns, rifles, other small arms. Big ticket items, planes, tanks, missiles, they're much more heavily regulated. And so just keep that in mind. So 2017 was the first year of the Trump admin where there was notification of arms sales, right? So DoD notified Congress. They said that the buyer is the Taipei Economic Cultural Representative Office in the United States. The Navy and the Air Force both sent notifications to the to Congress, and this was for hundreds of millions of dollars worth of goods that are being sold to Taiwan, and they have a rationale of importance, which is interesting, right? So proposed service is, or this proposed sale is to serve U.S. national economic and security interests by supporting the recipient's continuing efforts to modernize its armed forces and maintain a credible defensive capability. The proposed sale will help improve the security of the recipient and assist in maintaining political stability, military balance, economic progress in the region. It also spoke, and that was a direct quote, it also spoke about how it wouldn't alter the balance of power. And interestingly, 8 years later, in 2025, the rationale used in the most recent announcements are extremely similar. So in 2017, the sales included a bunch of things: lightweight torpedo conversion kits, Mod 6AT heavyweight torpedoes, joint standoff weapons, high-speed anti-radiation missiles. And these sales, they came in the early months of Trump's presidency. A Brookings Institute analysis depicts how President Trump policy wasn't entirely fleshed out at the time. He broached using Taiwan as leverage over China, and he also had said maybe he would consult President Xi before engaging with Taiwan. And that kind of flip-flopping is prevalent throughout his entire term, to some extent throughout his term currently in 2025, which we see up until November, President Trump had actually declined an arms package that we were going to give to Taiwan, sell Taiwan. And there was no arms sales until November 13th and November 18th, when 2 separate arms sales packages were announced totaling $1 billion. The Defense Security Cooperation Agency announced that $300 million sale of fighter jet components to support Taiwan. And then there's a separate $700 million missile defense system sale announced. And so this comes during an alleged detente of relations with trade relations with China. And it's interesting, it kind of illustrates this flip flop of policy during the Trump administration. And I'm going to now pass it off to Thomas to speak about China's response and then Taiwan's agency.
So, while both sides acknowledge that Trump 2.0 is a more isolationist presidency with his American First policy, the question remains if he holds that position under extreme circumstances. If we look back on history before World War II, is much more isolationist than today. However, once the war started, in Europe, the Lend-Lease supplied the UK with weapons. However, Trump is a very transactional person by nature. As Diego mentioned, Trump likes a deal. He likes making deals. So, if Taiwan is going to get these weapons, it needs to be a deal. If Taiwan can offer a better economic deal than China, then Trump will go for it. That's all it really comes down to in kind of Trump's mind. Who can make America richer and who can I get a better deal out of? Now, in Xi's 2025 New Year's speech, he said, one cannot stop the reunification with China. This is prescient because the Biden administration, as Diego said, sold weapons to Taiwan and gave Taiwan a significant amount of military aid. This is seen might as a warning that no other nation should interfere with a possible reunification war with China. We have seen how fiercely China is willing to defend this. After Prime Minister Takaishi said that military action towards Taiwan would constitute a grave threat to Japan, and a PRC, for lack of a better word, went ballistic. They have been sending out warships. If you have a look on their foreign ministry's Twitter feed, they are sounding like a villain. It is not. They are not taking this as an irrational response. They are going very much out there, very much escalating the threat. Now, with all of this talk about China and America, we must not forget about Taiwan's agency and security. Now, it is not like President Lai is sitting around the presidential office building waiting for Secretary Hegseth to call him and tell him that Taiwan is going to defend themselves. One of the main points for Taiwanese defense is to protect the island from missiles. After all, you could have the best surface-to-sea defense system on Earth, but it means nothing if it gets blown up in 30 seconds after the war starts. Right now, Taiwan is updating its air defense system by creating a T-dome. Think, the Iron Dome in Israel. President Lai announced this project in October, with the system integrating anti-drone, missile, air, and hypersonic attacks. This will be maintained by U.S. Patriot missiles along with Taiwanese-made air defense systems. Now, this is important to Taiwanese defense strategy that President Lee announced this would be a special line item in the budget dedicated just to this project. Now, it is also important to mention when he made this announcement. President Lai made this announcement during the 10/10 celebrations in Taiwan. It is seen more as a pseudo move towards independence. They are bringing up their air defense capabilities. They're bringing up their protection from China so they can act more independently. Now, what is China doing about this? Because nothing ever happens in a vacuum. I mean, Xi isn't just taking a nap in the Zhongzi and hoping that President Lai suddenly thinks communism is great and immediately reunites with the PRC. The PLA has been developing hypersonic missiles to try to punch through any T-dome that Taiwan builds. What Taiwan and China are doing are a series of moves and counter moves. One upgrades the defense systems, the other upgrades their offensive weapons. Defense, offense, defense, offense. Nothing ever happens in a vacuum. And Taiwan has the ability to try to defend itself. They do have the sovereignty. They are not waiting for the United States to come around and say, yep, you can do that. They are their own independent nation. And it should always be factored in whenever discussing about this, because this isn't a game, this isn't a great power game. This is regarding a nation, and it should be treated as such.
I'm Gabe again. Hello. I think just the biggest takeaway from you just said, Thomas, is I guess that that wasn't isn't just an object of U.S.-China competition, but its own strategic actor making its own calculations, um, pulling together just sort of what everyone has said so far and distilling it through a sort of U.S. policy analysis and implications angle, um, the what consequences, including the what consequences of Trump air arms sales to Taiwan and how that approach compares to previous administrations. I'll just quickly recap that Trump massively increased the scale and visibility of U.S. arms transfers to Taiwan, notifications and packages that together amounted to a historically large volume of potential sales. Comparing that to prior administrations, Obama issued significant but comparatively smaller, often incremental packages. For example, $1.83 billion notification in late 2025. And again, as I mentioned, Trump made them far, far larger, including an $8 billion notification, which is, obviously 8 times larger than the Obama package, or 4 times larger, rather. The policy difference isn't, I would say, simply dollars, but sort of a change in posture. Whereas Obama years were a little more cautious, or but not just Obama, but past administrations, um, dating back to Nixon, were a little more cautious and calibrating reassurances. Trump was far more focused on deterrence. So um, I think the key thing to get from this is that there were some risks with this strategy, including escalation. Also, arms sales could serve as a potential substitute for more forward presence. So there's drawbacks from both sides, from people that want a hawkier approach and people who want sort of more cautious approach. And I think also it's very important to note that Taiwan sort of takes a large amount of time to absorb these systems, while Beijing is constantly adapting and modernizing in this regard. Um, the things that international policymakers can learn from this is firstly signal clarity. If the goal is deterrence without escalation, packages must be paired with clear crisis communication channels and contingency planning with regional partners. Secondly, policymakers can learn about the importance of integrated deterrence. The most durable security posture combines material assistance and exercises political consideration with partner coordination with partners, etc. And finally, resilience and asymmetric systems are cost imposing, and much more stabilizing thing would be sort of one for one parity purchases. In terms of how Trump stacks up to others, as I mentioned, he again went up, and the strategy was a lot more transactional. I think Diego covered this a little bit, and sort of conspicuous, pushing big ticket hardware and fast notifications, whereas previous administrations, as I said, often mix incremental sales with deniable lower profile support. Again, I can see merit in both of these. Some would argue that some of these are accelerating a conflict, and others could talk about the need to put more pressure. Anyways, Trump's arms sales reshaped the visible security relationship with Taiwan. They increased deterrent capability, but also amplified diplomatic friction and possibility of miscalculation. I would say overall, the enduring lesson is that arms sales work best as one element in a layered, clearly communicated, and politically sustainable strategy. I think with that, we will close. Just our briefing here. So thank you so much for listening, and now we take it away over there with the Q&A.